How do you read a poem that has iambic meter in it? How can you track the iambic meter? This is a question I get a lot. People ask, well, I want to pay attention to meter in poetry more, but how do I know what the meter is? How do I listen for the rhythms? I want to give an example of reading an iambic poem. This is a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's from a series of sonnets that she wrote, kind of in the voice of people who are either going off to World War II or who are back home worried and concerned about the people off on the front in World War II. They were written in the 1940s, and they display, I think, a really good mastery of simple, straightforward 20th century language, but also that patterns this language into discernible and sometimes very striking and beautiful meters. So I want to read you the first 4 lines of one of these sonnets. I hold my honey and I store my bread in little jars and cabinets of my will. I label clearly, and each latch and lid I bid, be firm till I return from hell. That hell kind of sneaks up on us a bit. Before we think about the content, let's think a little bit about the form. I hold my honey and I store my bread. That's the first line. It is 10 syllables long. Every word except for the word honey is 1 syllable. And it's easy to tell hold, store, bread. Those are easy. It's easy to tell that those are stressed syllables. The I's in it and the my's, the articles, they're not stressed. And this is very easy for us to pick up on the rhythm of English. The word honey, for instance, is the only 2-syllable word in that. And we know that we say honey, we pronounce the first syllable with a stress, and we don't stress the second syllable. We don't say honey, we say honey. So it's very easy to tell how the rhythm works in this first line. In fact, one could even criticize it for being too common. I hold my honey and I store my bread is something someone might say as they're putting away groceries. And I think Brooks really wants us to think about that because she's about to kind of throw us for a loop in the next line. So I hold my honey and I store my bread in little jars and cabinets of my will. So we keep on this putting away groceries or tidying the kitchen imagery up till the last 2 syllables. In little jars and cabinets. Okay, she's using a little longer words. Little is 2 syllables. Cabinets is a weird word. When I first read this poem, it took me a minute to say, should I say cabinets? Kind of pronounce it as a 3-syllable word where we stress the first and the last syllable with a middle unstressed I. But Gwendolyn Brooks is writing, we have to remember, in the mid-20th century. She's writing in Chicago. You wouldn't say cabinets. That would be maybe an old-fashioned way of saying cabinets. That's how we say it in America, cabinets. It's a 2-syllable word. We stress the cab, not the nets. And if you read it as an iambic line, unstressed, stress, unstressed, unstressed, stress, with no variations, it becomes very clear that you're supposed to pronounce it as cabinets, in little jars and cabinets of my will. Now, it's that my will, that unstressed, stressed, article modifying will, that becomes a kind of transformation of these first lines. It's not just about literally putting your honey and bread away. You're putting those common things, honey, sweetness, bread, something that's strengthening, that's very basic sustenance, you're putting them away into your will. And the larger context that this is spoken in the voice of a soldier going off to war, I think helps us see, this very simple iambic meter, focusing on these very simple images. These are allegorical, or they're symbolic, of someone who's storing away the common sweetnesses and sustenances as they go off to battle, go off over the sea. It's very striking, and it's a really good use of the iambic meter because it lulls us into a commonplace rhythm. We feel a commonplace setting, and then we're raised up to more ultimate considerations, even more tragic considerations. I label clearly, and each latch and lid I bid, be firm till I return from hell. I label clearly, and each latch and lid. Once again, most of those words are single syllables. Latch, lid, honey, bread. We're still in the common quotidian world. But she's not using terms like quotidian. Gwendolyn Brooks could use very complex diction, but here she's trying to keep it simple because she's trying to show us these simple common things are what the soldier is having to say goodbye to, having to fortify himself with as he goes off to hell. Now, I didn't tell you the name of this poem before I read to you part of it because the name kind of gives away the big metaphor going on. The name of the poem is My Dreams, My Works Must Wait Till After Hell. So this is a man, maybe a woman, but as we know, mostly women stayed back home and the men went. This is someone who is bidding everything, wait for me. I have to go off to hell. And as another critic has pointed out, this also reminds us of the hero's journey. The hero, whether it's Odysseus, whether it's Aeneas, whether it's Dante, they go on a journey through hell and back. And so this idea that this is a hero at the beginning saying goodbye to home and saying, I'm going to come back to you. Now, if we read the whole poem, which we don't really have time to do, but if we read the whole poem, we'll see that one of the worries is that the soldier who's going off to hell, the hero who's going off to hell, is worried that he'll be damaged by his journey, who he won't remember home. Iambic meter with really simple diction, one-syllable words, very common language, is very common in English poetry, especially from the last few hundred years up through the early 20th century. And I hope that you can see from what we've talked about that even in the simplicity, it can be raising our minds to large considerations of what it means to live well, what people go through, even in our modern age with war and loss and desire for home and not being able to stay there. And all of this is presented in rhythmic diction. And I think if this wasn't an iambic meter, it would be harder for us to maybe sense the beauty and tragedy of what's being stated, but the beauty of the rhythm and the simplicity of the diction is leading us slowly to these insights. Thanks for hanging out today. Next time I want to talk about reading a poem with trochaic meter.